Fellow Texans, now's your chance to give the perfect gift to your favorite state and your favorite Texan. The Alamo is currently undergoing upgrades and additions like a state-of-the-art museum, augmented reality experience, and more. Donate to help this mission, and you could even have your name on a star at the Visitor Center or a personalized paver. Or include your favorite Texan's name as a unique holiday gift, one that will last for as long as there's an Alamo to remember. Donate today at thealamo.org.
Stories bigger than Texas, the Alamo podcast. As we approach Veterans Day here in the United States, we're celebrating the Alamo's strong ties to the U.S. Army. When Texas joined the United States in 1845, the Alamo served as an Army outpost and depot for the next 30 years. Today, we reveal the indelible mark the U.S. Army left on the Alamo, how the Alamo witnessed both the nation's manifest destiny and its darkest days, and how the Alamo continues to remember our long-standing partnership with the Army. I'm your host, Emily Balcom. Today we're joined by Kolby Lanham, the Alamo senior researcher and historian. Thanks for being here.
As always, happy to be here.
Kolby, Veterans Day is in a few days, and as our podcast listeners know, you are a proud Air Force veteran, so the Alamo's military history is really close to your heart.
Yeah, I think San Antonio has the designation of Military City USA, and we have a lot of veterans and active duty service members here in the city. And so whenever you have a chance to link in the historical ties of the military to the current ties, I think it's really important that we don't forget the past.
Because it all stems from the Alamo.
Yeah, it all starts here. There's not really a time where the Alamo does not have soldiers garrisoned within its walls.
After Texas wins its independence and the Mexican Army packs up and leaves the Alamo, there's about a 10-year period where the Alamo really isn't a part of people's daily lives.
Yeah, the Alamo's across the river. Most of the functions of the city are happening to the west of the river, and so it's kind of just sitting, the city on the hill, and it's vacant. The state of Texas also has other things going on. We have the Comanche coming from the north. We have the Apache coming from the west. We have encroachment by the United States on the east, and then from the south, Mexico, which is a constant problem with each other, poking each other, trying to start conflicts. And at the same time, the city of San Antonio has things going on that are keeping it from focusing on its historical roots. 1840, you have the Council House fight between people of San Antonio and also some Rangers, Texas Rangers, and the Comanche. So that's one, big issue. And then the Wool expedition in September of 1842, where General Adrian Wool retakes San Antonio. And it happens a couple different times, different people. So San Antonio is focusing on all that. Plus, we have epidemics passing through the area, killing a lot of people. And so when you combine all of that, they're not really looking at the Alamo in a historical sense. It's just an old building.
It's not until 1845, when Texas is annexed into the United States, that people really look at the Alamo with fresh eyes. What kind of shape is it in at this point?
Yeah, it's in a pretty sad state of repair. The Alamo has been mostly neglected. It was occupied on several different occasions by Texian national troops. There were even a couple men put to death there for crimes they committed when they were in the service of the National Army. And so it wasn't really used, but now, statehood's coming up and there's going to be an opportunity to use it as a fort again.
Even with the Alamo in disrepair, like you just said, there's a strategic reason the U.S. Army wants and kind of needs a staging post for troops and supplies in this area.
Yeah, this comes down to location. It's centrally located in the United States. It's a launching off point for movements westward in what we now call manifest destiny. The idea the United States should go from coast to coast. It's only 140 miles to Eagle Pass. It's 150 miles to Indianola, 150 to Fort McCavitt, and Laredo's 150, Galveston's 250. You're within the reach of the coast, 250 miles of the coast, and you have all these other veins that are spreading out that become forts or outposts for the U.S. Army. So you're going to need a centrally located city. And while Texas is centrally located in the United States, San Antonio is centrally located in the state. So it just makes the most sense.
And around this time, the United States is thinking war with Mexico is imminent.
Yeah, they're thinking war with Mexico is imminent because they're staging the war with Mexico. So, again, poking that bear, they're doing it back and forth. Mexico loses control of Texas, obviously, and claims very different borders than what Texas is claiming. And that problem doesn't go away whenever we're annexed into the Union. It just becomes a larger problem with a larger nation.
So the Army wants to use the Alamo as a quartermaster depot. What is a Quartermaster Depot?
Quartermaster Depot is a central location where you can feed, clothe, and arm soldiers of a particular army, in this case, the United States Army.
It's one thing to say, okay, we're going to put a bunch of U.S. soldiers at the Alamo, but legally, a whole bunch of things have to happen first.
You can say, yes, we want this to be the tip of the spear for the U.S. Army, but to actually make that happen, it's the Quartermaster Depot that's going to allow that. You could move 10,000 troops into Texas. How do you feed them? What uniforms are they going to wear? What guns do they use to protect themselves? The horses, draft animals, wagons. And then there's also all the things that go along with the Army, all these teamsters and people who are traveling with the Army to make sure this living, breathing animal continues to do its job at the utmost capability. And so that has to happen, but also finding space. The U.S. Army is going to be obviously eyeing San Antonio. They want to be there. The city of San Antonio and the aldermen of the city want them to be in the downtown area. It behooves them to do that. Why? Because they're going to be spending federal dollars in the city. It's going to boost the economy. And so the city offers them several different locations to put the Army. The Army is also very keenly aware that their men have money in their pockets and they're going to be causing problems. You know, San Antonio had the largest red light district in the United States for a very long time, and it wasn't far from where the troops would have been stationed. So the Army initially is very hesitant. So they split the command up and put one over by Mission Concepcion and the other one over by where the modern day San Antonio Zoo is, to keep them separated, less men to take care of in one place, and then also to try and keep them away from the downtown area where they know problems are going to spur up.
That's fascinating. And then on the paperwork side, there are lease agreements that have to be hammered out.
You have all this property moving into the area. Where do you put that property? You know, a lot of the stuff can be damaged if it gets wet, or a lot of things are being stolen. The Army talks about that, things going missing, and it's not a good thing when ordnance, guns and ammunition go missing. And so they end up getting into an agreement with several different entities, and they rent out 1 million square feet of space in San Antonio. That's where the number will kind of reach its maximum. But the headquarters portion is going to be at the Alamo. And the Alamo is then owned by the Archdiocese. So they go into a contract with the Archdiocese to use that as a headquarters and kind of the heart of the Quartermaster Depot. And think of it like a big wagon wheel. The hub, the strong point that bears all of the weight, is going to be San Antonio, and then all the spokes go out to the other forts and outposts to make a giant wheel.
I like that analogy. And occupation takes place shortly before statehood. So the U.S. Army is already here when Texas formally becomes a state.
Yes, you'll see this trend during this time period of the United States government seeing the writing on the wall before it's done. There's going to be two companies, A&G, they're mounted dragoons, or mounted infantry, and they're going to cross the Cibolo River in October of 1845, just several months before the ink's even dry on our annexation paperwork. You'll see the same thing in California under John C. Fremont, heading into California and planting the American flag, and the government said, what are you doing? Slow down a little bit. So the same thing's happening in Texas.
If you could step into a time machine, the 1850s would really be a maybe underrated time to visit the Alamo, because just the flurry of activity that's taking place to fix things up.
One of the major things is the Long Barracks getting a new roof. They're also putting the first roof on the Alamo that it's ever had. We've talked about in other podcasts why the roof didn't get put up, and now the Army's fixing that. They're also going to put the hump-shaped cap that we all know and so iconic to the Alamo. They're going to place it there in 1850 along with the first roof. A lot of supplies will be coming from areas like Bastrop. They're going to pump a lot of money into the buildings to try and use them to great effect. And one of the other things to do is they're going to put a second floor in the church, and that remnants of that church, at least in the pilasters, you can still see that today.
Was the earthen ramp used as the cannon ramp in the battle still there?
Yeah, the U.S. Army talks about that earthen ramp still being there, and they said when they removed it, they found human remains. In one of the rooms, they found a bell partially covered, and that bell is believed to be an original mission bell. They used it to basically chime throughout the day for different events. And then it went to Fort Sam Houston, and I'm getting a little bit off topic, but it went to Fort Sam Houston in the quadrangle, and it marked the half-hour chime, and it's since disappeared. That's one of the other mysteries that we've chased down in the past couple of years. That Alamo bell's gone.
The mysteries of history.
They continue.
So the Alamo Church was used as a warehouse with that second story. What was the lawn barrack used for?
It was used for kind of office and admin buildings, but also storage.
The Army unknowingly preserved the frescoes on the wall of the Alamo Church. How did they do that?
Yeah, the Army doesn't get a lot of credit for being conservationists. So, and I always joke when I do my tours, I point out the things the U.S. Army did, and there people have, made notes like, oh, that's kind of dull, or that doesn't look great. It's like they didn't care about how things looked. They cared about functionality. Does a window open and close? That's all they need. And they're still that way today. The U.S. Army is very, very much in that same mindset. But when they're going inside the church, they're going to cover the interior of the walls with anywhere from 3 to 5 coats of whitewash paint, probably to beautify the area just a little bit, make it look clean and nice. Remember, they're inhabiting a building that was built in the 1750s. They're going to cover the original frescoes, and that will preserve them.
How does it preserve them? To me, it just sounds like you're covering them up, but the opposite happens.
Yeah, you're keeping them away from the elements. You're keeping them away from soot from pot-bellied stoves and things of that nature. And so all those things in the air, all those impurities will land on the whitewash. And then when they were removed in the 2000s is when we found the frescoes. So they unknowingly saved them from destruction.
And when people walk into the Alamo Church, I hope after listening to this episode, they look around with a different lens because you can see the Army's handiwork in so many places.
Oh, yeah. You can see the remnants of what we believe to be the freight elevator. So when you walk in the Alamo Church, just turn around and look. You'll see 2 lines on the upper portion of the wall. You'll also see black markings that say U.S. and then several different cases. You can see them throughout the building, but also you can see carvings of people's names, and we've traced those back to U.S. Army soldiers. So I always joke and say when Army soldiers get bored, they like to doodle on things. It's no different now. I've seen it myself, and it was no different back then.
A part I like looking at on what was once the second floor, there are these doorways to nowhere.
Yeah, so they had second floors they had built in, so they needed entry points for those areas. So you can see doorways. There's also like down low, there's like a square in the monk's burial room, and it's really low to the ground and no one can actually walk through that, but it's a coal chute probably to feed the pot-bellied stoves that are heating up the building, because for San Antonio, we get 4 days of winter, so those 4 days are pretty cold. Yeah, that's probably what they're using that for. So there's all kinds of remnants of the U.S. Army scattered throughout the building.
In terms of the level of daily activity, what would have been happening at the Alamo during this time?
What you would have saw if you were standing in the plaza during this time period is you would have seen wagons, both those that were under contract with U.S. Army and U.S. Army proper wagons, offloading and loading up supplies to carry out to those forts we talked about. They're going to be feeding, clothing, and arming roughly at one point 20% of the federal army. There's uppermost area of Texas, their supplies is going to be coming in through Arkansas and the East Coast, but then the lower part of Texas is going to be fed through the Alamo mainly. You would have saw that. It would have been bustling. It would have been very busy. You'd have seen U.S. Army officers riding on horseback. You saw dispatch riders and mail, paymasters coming through. You just saw a lot of business moving in and out of this area and a lot of traveling.
With a modern lens, when you think of a military base or post, you think about like training exercises. Did that happen at the Alamo, or was it more the transport of goods?
I think it's more the transport of goods, and also, they're going to be doing movements and scouting and things of that nature. They'd be leaving San Antonio and going to these other forts. I think about Fort Mason in Mason, Texas. If you had never had a chance to go up there, it's really neat. All these different officers are being sent here. This was kind of the place to be. If you were an Army officer, especially if you were one hoping to gain rank and move up through the ranks, this is a great place to do that because there's constant action. There's fighting both along the border, but also with different Native American tribes in the area. So this would be the place to be. There's also westward expansion. We're talking about all these movements west. We have key figures like Grant and Lee, Albert Sidney Johnston. They're all moving through this area, the who's who of the U.S. Army in this period. And then, of course, the buildup for the Mexican-American War. We've also got Camel Corps, which if you haven't read about that or listened to our podcast, it's a fantastic podcast on the Camel Corps. Go listen to it. And I can't possibly do it justice right here, but I am going to say, it was a neat experiment, and Jefferson Davis kind of led that. And he pushed really hard for that because they saw that camels would be a lot more efficient than mules or donkeys or horses. And he was correct. And
to move goods from the middle part of the country, which would be San Antonio, towards California.
Yeah, that starts about 1854. They start moving camels in here, and it's actually met with great success. It's a little thing called the Civil War happens, and it derails just about everything.
Well, the military is great at keeping records, which is a wonderful thing for research historians like you.
Yeah, all of those records help us determine what the church first roof was made out of. How many nails did it take? How many feet of lumber? Where are they getting it from? They're having to account for all these dollars. Also, like right on the cusp of the Civil War, the U.S. Army buys the only piece of property that they're going to buy until they build Fort Sam Houston, and that's the U.S. Arsenal. They were storing explosives and firearms and things like that nature inside the Alamo Church. And as the city's growing up around it, it's probably not the best idea to have explosives in there. And so they move out to where the HEB headquarters is on South Flores and Cesar Chavez. And that's going to be the first piece of property they actually buy. And they start building up an arsenal and a blockhouse. And they don't finish it because Civil War starts.
Exactly. As any student of history knows, the 1860s brings on big changes caused by the Civil War, starting with the Alamo becomes a Confederate property.
Yeah, this is a story I love to tell. It's not as well known as you would think. A man by the name of Benjamin McCullough, who was supposed to come to the Alamo with David Crockett, they were friends in Tennessee. He falls ill on their travels down here, and Crockett basically says, catch up with us when you're in Texas, when you get better. Of course, the Alamo happens, and that doesn't happen. That's not the case. He never sees Crockett again, but he does join the Texian army, and he serves with distinction. And then the Texian regular military, but also becomes a ranger. So he makes a name for himself in Texas, Ben McCullough does. And on February 16th, secession is boiling over in our state, and he rides into Alamo Plaza with roughly 2,000 people, armed to the teeth on horseback, and he demands the surrender of the federal garrison under General Twiggs. General Twiggs, in my opinion, gets a bad rap, being that he was from Georgia. Everyone says, oh, well, he just rolled over. But if you really look into it, he sent 13 letters in a very short period to DC trying to discern, what do we do with all these supplies? What if the secessionists are not dramatic? They're being real and they're going to actually secede. And he's being told by Washington, you're being dramatic. It's not what's happening, but that does happen. And it culminates with this event on the 16th of February, 1861. And General Twiggs is not an idiot. He says, well, I've got about 26 men on my general staff. I'll turn over the keys. And the Alamo falls into the hands of secessionists. The American flag is pulled down from the Alamo and a secessionist flag is raised in its place. And so thus goes San Antonio for the Civil War. Had that not happened, let's say Twiggs isn't almost 80 years old and he's kind of his rough and ready self that he was in the Mexican War or even prior to that, I don't imagine he would have done what he did. And I'd imagine the first shots of the Civil War would have been fired at the Alamo.
Amazing to think about. What do we know about how the Confederate Army used the Alamo?
Unfortunately for us, the Confederate Army's got their hands full just about the entire war, and record keeping in that regard on this front is not great. We know they used it for a similar purpose as the U.S. Army had used it during the time that they own it. We know that there was a fire at some point. The story is that soldiers are up there smoking cigarettes on the second floor and they catch the floor and the roof on fire. And they're going to continue to use the Alamo in that regard. They're going to also, we talk about Quartermaster Depot. That includes the Federal Arsenal, which they will continue to use. They will build up the blockhouse and finish it, make some stables, and then they'll even build a tannery over by the zoo. And so we know that they're working and using the Quartermaster Depot to build these other projects out.
When the Civil War ends in 1865, the U.S. Army moves back into the Alamo, and you start to see the city growing up into the urban center we see today. How does that growth impact the Army?
It's a really positive thing for the U.S. Army, and it's a positive thing for San Antonio that they're there. They go hand in hand. The Army is going to play an impactful role in keeping the city of San Antonio safe, not just with strength or military strength. I'm talking about in other ways. They were tasked with keeping the acequias clean, with clean water, and keep people from dumping things in them because people are still using them for drinking water. They're going to bring medicine to the town, and they're going to have a decent hospital and things of that nature. And so it's a very positive thing for San Antonio. And then because the city supports them, the Army can grow. And eventually they're going to build the largest military installation in the United States at the time, which would be Fort Sam Houston.
Which remains today.
Yeah, 1877, they're going to pack up their stuff from the Alamo and they're going to head over there. And there's not really U.S. Army presence per se at the Alamo after that.
Because of the Alamo's rich history with the U.S. Army, today we do a lot of outreach with our local military. I know you really enjoy giving staff ride tours. What are those? Yeah,
my department, Thomas, who you've heard on the podcast many times, he's kind of taken that over as his project. But staff rides are in-depth tours given to the United States military members where they're doing a team building exercise. And let's say that these people are going to be, maybe they're infantry guys. So we'll send them stuff ahead of time, infantry tactics, movements of troops, how it was working out in Texas. They'll read all of that stuff and do a classroom portion, and then they'll come to us. And then they do walk the battlefield and they get to learn about all of those things they've been learning about for a couple of weeks. Now they're going to apply that on site. If the troops are really proactive, they will have each person tasked with, okay, you're going to do Santana, you're going to do Travis, you'll do Bowie. And then they'll have to stand up in front of their colleagues and they'll have to read out, what was this man doing here? Why was he here? What were the motivations for this? Why did they leave the supplies here or move it there? That's what staff rides are. And they're a great way of helping troops understand the historical aspects of the Alamo, but also bring it into a modern light and help them understand the modern history as well. And then it helps us liaison with the community and keep a good, strong relationship with the United States military.
During Fiesta, San Antonio's annual festival that we call our 10-day party with a purpose, we have military days where each branch gets to come for demonstrations. They are really cool and interesting if you've never been to one. Then we also host promotional and retirement ceremonies on site, and you've been witness to many of those.
Yeah, those are really neat. I think that whenever a soldier's going to bring up his commitment to the military, it's a really big deal. They could do that anywhere. It's almost always their choice. And the fact that they want to come to the Alamo speaks volumes about our site and the ties we have to the United States military.
You're a part of the team choosing artifacts to display inside the Alamo's future visitor center and museum, which is scheduled to open in late 2027. Can you give us a sneak peek of what artifacts people will see to help tell the story of the Quartermaster Depot era?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite portions of the museum because this is an area of Alamo history that's been underrated. I don't think people talk about it enough. This portion of the museum is going to have an interactive table where you can see what supplies are being brought in, things of that nature. You can click on different pieces of supplies and learn how far reaching the Alamo's ties were to the state of Texas and the U.S. Army, tying those together. We're also going to have saddles. We're going to have firearms. We're going to have edge weapons. We're going to have the flag that flew over the Alamo on the day that Ben McCullough rode into San Antonio to demand the surrender of the federal army. We own that flag, and that'll be on display. We have an original portrait of John R. Baylor in his Confederate uniform, done very well in 1861. And so we're going to talk about all these moving parts of the U.S. Army and how important their contributions are to not only Texas, but San Antonio and the Alamo.
Can't wait to see it all come together. The Alamo Church, the Lawn Barrack, Alamo Plaza, these were not places built as military structures. But like any good soldier, they adapted and evolved and served as a witness to history. All you have to do is look at that famous arch and see the military's impact here.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Not built with military intentions, but they also weren't built to be a museum. And they weren't built to bring 2 million people to San Antonio. And so this styling and adaptive reuse that we've used on the buildings has done everyone a service. It's done the average visitor. They get to come and learn about the Alamo. We get to be caretakers of the most important site in the entire state, and probably in the United States. Yes, I'm biased. I think that though they weren't built for those purposes, we have made sure that they stand the test of time. And long after all of us are gone, they'll be doing the same thing and probably to a greater effect.
Kolby Lanham, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for your service.
Thanks for having me.
Be sure to check out the podcast notes. We're going to link to an essay about this era written by former Alamo curator Dr. Bruce Winders. It includes a very helpful map of supply routes used by the U.S. Army to move goods west. And we know some listeners jump around from episode to episode. That's okay. And there are pieces of today's story that we've talked about more in depth on previous episodes. So we're going to link to a few of those. First, the episode on the Mexican Army's final days at the Alamo in May 1836. Then the episode about the U.S. Army's camel experiment at the Alamo. And also the episode about the Civil War in San Antonio. You've been listening to Stories Bigger Than Texas, the Alamo Podcast.